Malenia is considered by many to be the most difficult boss in all of Elden Ring. This boss took me hours to beat on my first playthrough, and in those hours I downloaded her moveset to my brain, and I am here today to impart that knowledge upon you. I also saw a lot of people saying that this boss is not well made or poorly designed, and I disagreed so much that I needed to start a YouTube channel. Before we get to the actual fight, let's talk about the strategies and items you can use. I think melee is the easiest method to kill her, so we're going to focus primarily on that. Spells can work, but it's very hard to find time to cast them in the second phase, so we're just going to go over melee. Also, we're not going to be using summons of any type. For all of the footage you're going to see, I'm going to be wearing the full Radahn's armor set. Malenia only deals physical damage, so just try to get your physical defense as high as possible. Most of my character's stats are going to be around 40. None of the strategies here make use of all the stats at once, so if you reach here at around level 120, you can have 40 and 4 different stats and all of these strategies can work for you. For talismans, I recommend a few, but some more than others, so I'll go through them in order of importance. The Dragon Crest Great Shield for physical defense, Green Turtle Talisman for stamina regen, the Great Jar's Arsenal if you need more equip load, the Erdtree's Favor gives you everything, the Great Shield Talisman if you don't want to deal with the Waterfowl Dance, that's the spinny one. Any of these stat boosting medallions are better than nothing. Any of the sorcery ones, because sorceries are tough to land against this boss. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation. It's a decent damage boost, but it effectively does nothing for most of the fight. The Blessed Dew Talisman's the only insane one. No. For the weapons, Malenia is very weak to bleed and frost, so ideally you'd want a weapon that builds one of those, and if you're power stancing, maybe even both. She also has very low poise, so any weapon that can make her flinch with every attack is ideal. Basically anything that isn't a dagger should have no problems doing that. Some of my favorite weapons are: the Godskin Stitcher is number 1 for me, lets you build frost or bleed very quickly, has fast attacks and good range. The Moonveil or the Meteoric Ore Katana, they're about the same, but the posture damage in the Moonveil weapon art kind of sets it apart. It also builds bleed, albeit slower than the Stitcher. The Grave Scythe, or any scythe really. It's a little slower than the other options, but it does really good damage and has good range, as well as already having bleed on it, which allows for whatever weapon art you want. In reality, almost any weapon can work though, so onto the fight. We're going to begin with phase 1. There's a lot of attacks in this fight. Some are pretty rare and some come up all the time. Any attack she lands on you will heal her, even if you block it, so I would recommend two-handing your weapon for basically the whole fight, or to power stance a weapon of your choice. You can parry her, but you need to land 3 parries in order to get a critical strike on her, and if you're a god gamer enough to do that, then what are you doing here? You don't need a boss guide. In phase 1, look out for any overhead attack. Roll towards her so you're in range to land attacks immediately after. She never follows up on any of her overheads in phase 1, so there's an opportunity to land some attacks after. Most windows with an average speed weapon like a Godskin Stitcher, you'll be able to land 2 hits pretty safely, and depending on the weapon, maybe a third. Experiment with yourself with whatever weapon you're using. One attack I can guarantee you're going to see a lot is this one. She charges up, runs forward, waves her sword 3 times like an Oblivion character, and after those 3 attacks she has one more big swing after. Roll to the side of her, the side that she doesn't have the sword on, and you'll be safe from this attack. There's 2 versions of this attack. If you see these sparks on her weapon, she's going to follow up with something else immediately after. It can be almost any move. You're hoping for her to swing again and transition into an overhead for easy hits. She also can chain this attack together multiple times, but because it's pretty easy to dodge, it's not normally an issue. The second version of this attack is much simpler. If there's no sparks on the sword, you're going to see 3 fast swings, a pause, and another swing. Because there's no follow-up on this, there's going to be a big window to land attacks. Probably 2 or 3. Most of her attacks in phase 1 are pretty simple, except for one, but we'll get to that. A grab attack with an easy to spot wind-up. She once again never follows up with anything after this, so don't get hit or you're going to get messed up, and she heals for a lot if she lands this one. A charged stab attack. She jumps up, sparks come off the sword, and she closes the distance with a stab. Roll backwards so you're right beside her afterwards. You can even take a step forwards while she's in the air, so when you roll backwards you're right beside her to land some attacks immediately. A 2-hit attack where she charges up, jumps in the air with an upward swing, and comes down with a downward swing. She has a lot of poise when she's charging this attack, so you won't be able to interrupt it, but it's a very easy move to see coming and to dodge and to land attacks after. A mix of the last two. Sparks fly, she charges forward and swings twice with the second being an overhead. Roll anywhere, make sure to roll twice if you can, and land hits after. There's no follow up to this one. This attack where she kicks you after dashing towards you. This is a move you can hang your hat on. Very predictable, you can dodge it by just walking backwards, you don't even need to roll. Because there's no follow-up, you can also land shots pretty easily. This is one of the reasons I like a weapon with good range like the Godskin Stitcher for this fight. It's very easy to get the range right and land a few shots after this really common attack. The rest of the moves in phase 1 just consist of 1 and 2 hit combos that are quite easy to dodge and not very easy to punish. You can also just attack her before she even attacks you, but this one is kind of inconsistent because if she charges up the wrong attack when you're coming in, you're most likely going to get hit. And all the moves mentioned here make up about 90% of phase 1, except for one attack. The Waterfowl Dance, aka the Flurry attack, aka the Anime Spin attack, aka the Bosnian Blender, is an attack most people struggle with. She can only use this move once you put her below 75% HP. It's definitely the most difficult to deal with, but there are a couple ways to survive it. When she's about to do this move, you'll see her jump in the air, pause for a second, before hitting you with 4 flurries, the first of which being the longest and the most damaging. If you get caught directly under her when she starts this attack, you're most likely gonna die or take heavy damage, so you can't be overly aggressive. This is also the attack that makes me not want to lead with jump attacks. Use them to punish when you know there's an opening, but do not lead with them, because if she opens with this, you're gonna get messed up. In all my attempts on this fight, I never saw her do this move twice in a row, but I did see it happen to some of my friends, so it's uncommon I guess, but it does happen. To dodge this attack, when you see her jump in the air, turn and run out of range of the first flurry, roll straight towards her for the second one, walk backwards while locked onto her to dodge the third one, and the fourth one is just around her when she stops, so don't rush in immediately and you will be safe. Landing shots on her after this attack is possible, but it's inconsistent in my experience, so go for it if you want. Also, when she's charging it up, her poise is much higher, so unless you get a bleed proc or something, you're not going to be able to stop her. Another way to dodge this attack is to use the Bloodhound Step Ash of War on your weapon. You may have to forego having bleed on your weapon for this, but it makes dodging much easier. An easier and more consistent way to deal with this attack is to use a Great Shield. If this is your plan, I would recommend the Great Shield Talisman because it helps a lot with blocking. You can also mix and match the two strategies, blocking the first flurry and rolling through the rest. Keep in mind she still heals if you block, but it is a little less healing. And it beats being dead. Even knowing all of this, I still do get hit a little bit by this attack, but it rarely one-shots me like it did in the beginning. That's about it for phase 1, but the final tip that I can give you is that if you finish her off with a bleed meter being really high, it carries into phase 2. Phase 2 is way harder than Phase 1. Imagine that! She begins at 80% HP but still heals after each attack. She still uses a lot of the same attacks as Phase 1 but adds on a few extra hits and inflicts Scarlet Rot on some of her moves. All the same dodges apply for all the repeated attacks. She's much more aggressive in Phase 2, so to any of the maniacs using the Blessed Do Talisman strategy, it might be time to give up the Ghost. This is also the reason I don't recommend Sorcery as your main method of attack, because it's tough to find time to cast it in Phase 2. Every Phase 2 begins with her in the air about to do a dive attack. After she lands, she will explode in a flower thing shortly after. After the flower explodes, there's a damaging field that applies Scarlet Rot around her for a few seconds. Casters can get off some free damage here because she sits still in the middle of it the whole time. For melee users, it may be worth taking 1 or 2 ticks of damage from the flower to run in and land some hits. If you left her bleed meter high at the end of Phase 1, you may even be able to get a bleed proc off and start the phase with her at reasonably low HP. She reuses this attack later in the fight, so it may be a good opportunity to take a second to heal or whatever you need to do when she uses it again. The kick attack is still used a lot in Phase 2. If you stand behind her, she will go for it a lot of the time, and the same dodges apply. She still uses the kick attack at the end of the forward dash, and you can punish it the exact same way. She also now has multiple jump attacks that end with an overhead. Most of these leave a Scarlet Rot thing on the ground in front of her that explodes after a second, so dodging behind her or to the side is ideal here. Typically, the Scarlet Rot doesn't factor into the fight as much as you may expect, because if you get hit enough for it to build up all the way, you normally just die from the damage of the attacks. The next new attack in Phase 2 is where she summons these flower people. This attack has a little wind up where she glows and jumps into the air. Once again, I recommend turning and running as far as possible. This gives you the maximum amount of time to see the attacks coming, and you will also just be out of range of some of them. She finishes this attack with a stab across the arena, which you can land some hits on her after. She doesn't heal if the flower man hit you, so that's something. The waterfall dance is the same as Phase 1, except now she builds Scarlet Rot on you when she hits you. If you're using the Great Shield strategy, I would recommend rolling through the second flurry anyway, because it's not very difficult to do and you want to avoid the build up as much as possible. She now also has a jumping attack where she turns and does a stab after. Once again, roll backwards if you can to be right beside her afterwards. Same as Phase 1, there are a couple 1 and 2 hit move combos that I haven't gone over because they're pretty easy to deal with and pretty tough to punish. I've gone over about 90% of what you can expect to see in this fight in both phases, and I trust that you can use the sense that God gave Geese to fill in the other 10% yourself. So that's basically how to do it. Like, comment, and subscribe. There might be more videos in the future, and if there isn't, then subscribing doesn't really negatively affect you in any way, so win-win. See ya.